So what we're dealing with in this routine is torsion, and the way we remove torsion in our spines is to mobilize the hip and the shoulder together at the same time, allowing the spine to decompress in the middle. So this is just a short routine, just a few poses. It takes about 10 minutes, and you should be really exhausted after this, because when we activate our spines, which is generally just very weak muscle within there that we're not used to using, you're going to get very tired because our spines are just used to bending. So it starts in a plank. We're doing a little leg extension, just warm that hip up, fire the glute, and we're bringing that foot to the outside of the hand. Do just a couple at your own pace here. This one's called the Thoracic Unwind. What I'm showing there is I'm locking my hip into a hinge position, and understanding the hip hinge is complicated because most of us don't do it. But then I'm using that shoulder, I'm externally rotating the arm at the same time that I'm locked in the hip hinge. Obviously one leg is doing something different than the other, but most of the weight is on that forward leg. And as the body's turning one way, that hip has to work extra, and obviously the shoulder has to work a lot to open up. And you should find that one shoulder is much harder to move than the other. We're doing 4 lifts on each leg here. Notice I'm changing my hand positions. You can mess around with that as you will. I do a couple on the inside of my foot and a couple on the outside of my foot, and that also changes where I'm holding my body weight. For the first 2, I was kind of pushing that inner thigh out to the side, opening up the hip joint. In the second 2, I brought the hip more internal, with more of an inner thigh squeeze. Then we go back to the plank, we're going to do the other side. Go ahead, do some leg extensions. Keep your spine really straight in this. The idea is not to get that leg really high. The idea is keep your spine straight as you can, your chest broad. Bring that leg up. So first 2, pushing that thigh out to the side. So as we're externally rotating the shoulder, same thing's happening in the hip. And the other side's working to stabilize. Now think about what your spine's doing here. That's also important. We don't see a ton of bending in the spine. We don't see a ton of warping with it. As the shoulder comes up, the head follows. So that spine is it's staying pretty neutral. Look like I paused there for a little second. Not sure if that was just a little camera glitch. Going up again. And I am spending a little extra time here on my left side, you might notice. And you always want to attack your weaknesses. Sometimes, like throughout the day, I won't even bother doing the other side because I know what my weak side is. And I'm just going to focus on that. Focus on stretching that, but also strengthening. That's the idea behind a pose, is we're not so much doing as much strengthening as we are stretching. It's all equally together. And the most important, the biggest difference with this type of stuff is we're teaching the spine to act strong. So every position, I'm getting length in my spine first. I'm getting my hips underneath me. I'm allowing my hips to hinge to take my weight, and then I'm adding a stretching element to it. So when we're first learning to do this stuff, we're not going deep into a stretch like this. We're not trying to force those hips to stretch anymore. Then our spine can handle, because our spine is so weak that it's just going to take over and start bending. So this is probably not the best place to start for most people. You want to focus more on foundation training, strengthening your spine before you really get into hip mobilization, shoulder mobilization. So if our spine is weak, this is all going to fall apart. We're just start doing yoga. And yoga just relies a lot on bending of the spine, the tilting of the pelvis too much. And a lot of patients who do a lot of yoga, who teach yoga, that come in and work on their spines, they're not strong spines. They're very distorted spines. So if you want to get strong, you want to get out of pain, you want to teach your spine to act as a strong central structure. It's not so much that yoga is bad. There's other things spiritual about it that I don't agree with it, but it's how you're approaching it, how you're doing it. And if your spine is just stiff all over, yeah, maybe yoga is a great place to start, but generally you want to decompress. You want to open up all those nerve roots, and now we want to take torsion off the spine. Because the more compressed you are, in our spines, the more our joints are compressed. A lot of times our spines do that to take off torsion, that twisting motion. The more you lengthen, sometimes that can add extra stress. So if that's a really big problem for you, if you're doing a lot of spinal stability and you're getting stronger, you're gonna feel better. The last element is this, getting more of that twisting out of there. And part of that is really focusing on your weak side. You should be noticing a weaker side, because that is the whole goal here, is imbalance. We're targeting imbalance. See there, I'm really setting myself up, opening up the shoulders, externally rotating the hands, palms forward, taking my time until I find my balance. There's no reason to rush, because it's not about how fast you can drop into a position, and it's not how deep you can go into position. It's about setting yourself up for a great stretch. Getting that good hip stretch, keeping the spine lengthened, not extending too much. We're not arching our back a lot. We're keeping our core engaged a lot. We don't want that belly sticking way out there like that. There, I'm glad I showed that example. That's a typical warrior one that you'll see, that we don't want that. Here we go, just showing it one more time. Spine straight, not arched. Again, this is really good for your ankles too. Ankle mobility is a big issue. Ankle mobility leads to hip immobility, which leads to spinal compression, because it's all part of our foundation. So we need to have a strong foundation. That requires having strong feet, strong hips. It's not just how we're carrying our body weight. Here I'm showing them keeping my eyes straight, turning my head. It's another point of torsion. Some of the eye muscles that move the eye attached to a bone called the sphenoid. The sphenoid has dural attachments where your spinal cord attaches into that sphenoid bone, so that can get twisted. A lot of people have tension headaches there, migraines there, right where the sphenoid is on either side of the eye. And what I was showing there was with Warrior 2, you are stretching that inner thigh on your back leg. Getting some adductor stretch, but also getting that higher hip muscle, the iliopsoas and the iliacus portion of that hip. And it's okay if you can't get to the ground. I think I'm only on my foot there. It's alright if you can't get that deep. If you're only on your shin muscle, that's fine. I'd rather have your spine straight than have you being like touching the ground, you know, flat-handed. Really taking your time. At the end of each of these positions, I'm doing about 3 deep breaths. And one thing I teach a lot on my videos is decompression breath. I was just pointing to my ankle, showing them, trying to mobilize that area. That's where you should feel it. But decompression breaths are raising the chest broad from the diaphragm. That's where you want the breath to arise from. You should feel your whole spine lengthen when you're doing that. Sliding down the shin muscle. I always do that too because it's a good massage. A lot of people really tight shins, really aggravated because we keep our hips forward, and that just irritates our shins, irritates our ankles. If you're not good with planks, do them on your knees. This is just an example of stuff you can do. You can modify this however you will. I do it different every time too. One thing I do encourage is trying to get deeper in your flat foot squat. That's with your heel down, and you're actually creating an arch with your feet. We're not on our toes. Our weight's mostly in our heels. You can just hang out there if you want, or you can do something like this. This is what we call like a gorilla lift. I like this because it kind of forces shoulder mobility right along with the hip, which is the whole theme here. And really targeting, you can see I'm really targeting that left side more than the right. Really paying attention there, not just like hitting the wall and stopping. It's like, hey, that arm didn't go as high. Then you stop, lengthen your spine, force it a little bit more. The idea is not to force it by bending at the spine. The idea is to keep your spine straight and strong. As the arm comes up, the chest drives up, the neck engages, our weight shifts back into our hips, weight more in the heels. You should feel like you're about to fall over in this position. That's normal. I'm going to show the same thing here from the side. So we don't want the knees going past our toes. We want to start the motion from our hips there. I pumped it a few times just to make sure my motion was starting at my hips. The quads are engaged. You'll feel the tension on your hamstrings when you got it right. Otherwise, it's too much knee motion. When that knee's going forward, that's when like, oh, I can't do a squat. It hurts my knees. Well, that's why you're using your knees when you should be using your hips. And your spine is probably very rounded and distorted too when those knees are going forward.
All right, so when we're on vacation in hotel rooms, we're resting on our breaks, to return to work. But we also need to strengthen our bodies so we can handle the traumas of work and daily life. It's not just resting, it's recovering. And one thing we're dealing with here is the word torsion. It's the word of the day. So if we're already twisted in the towel. But let's say the neck is twisted. You see that kind of reverberates down to the low back. And this is kind of a lot like what our spinal cord does, because our spinal cord is just one big nerve that goes down, and then there's branches all throughout the body. So the spinal cord has dural attachments to different bones in not only our skull and our tailbone, but along the way through the vertebral column. So if one's twisting, the rest of the body kind of compensates, so you're not walking in circles all the time if your head's turned one way. So we need to address these torsional things, get rid of the towels. We also need to learn to strengthen our spine. That's what my notes are here for. So torsion of the spine is the cause of neurological stress. It's the twisting of the spinal cord. So torsion of the spinal cord. So torsion of the spine is a cause of neurological stress. It's twisting the spinal cord. And torsion is created as a response to imbalances, sometimes in our shoulders and our hips. If this is really tight, it's pulling on my neck, it's pulling the bones out of my spine. The rest of my body is kind of compensating for that, shifting my weight left to right. And then you can view further down the extremities. If my ankle's locked up and not walking right, my hip's going to be messed up, and my spine will be messed up. And actually, we need to think backwards at this point. We need to strengthen our spines first, and then we need to address the immobility issues we have on our shoulders or hips or elsewhere. So spinal strengthening, the more stronger our spine is, the more I lengthen that towel, it's going to diminish those torsion twisting forces. So that's going to limit injury. It's going to limit stress for our spinal cord. And it's also going to encourage better movement from our hips and our shoulders and our knees, and etc. So spinal stabilization, strengthening the spine, can be increased by limiting not only compression, a compressed stance, and I'll demonstrate all this, but also bending at the spine. So we want to limit bending and we want to limit compression. We want to lengthen, and they kind of go together. And then when we're exercising, that's when we can target those weaknesses and immobility. So I'll just show you my little routine. I had a little numbness in my finger for a couple weeks. That shows me that there's some torsion on the spinal cord. It wasn't bad. It was only when I was working on people's necks. But it showed me there's a problem. And I'm pretty good about, throughout the day, not bending and not being compressed. So my spine is pretty strong, so I'm going to attack more of immobility issues in my hips and my shoulders, and they kind of go together. They're both ball socket joints, so if one's doing one thing, there's probably on the same side something else is happening to that one as well. So I'll show you my weak side, show you how imbalanced I get. So this is just a good split stance. I normally start in a plank, but I'll show you because there's something I want to show you here, and that's this. It's lengthening that spine. It's that decompression. So I'm setting my spine up. I'm not dropping right in to the stretch. I'm first setting myself up and lengthening the spine. Number one is spinal strengthening. This allows my hips to get into the socket better. They're turning in as I'm pushing my pelvis back. My hips turn in and I'm squeezing those hips into the socket. And then most of you know that this is a good spinal strengthening exercise. And most of my videos talk about that, but one way we can turn it into a stretch is allow that hip and that knee to go together. Then we're going to do a good stretch on the opposite hip. And I'm keeping that length, and I'm driving my arms back even more as I go into the stretch. I need to breathe here. So more of a strengthening portion up top here. Notice it's the opposite. The hips are coming back. And then I'm going into the stretch to get that hip mobilized. This is another good position here, where maybe I'll face this direction for you. pushing the hips back again, the chest goes high, we're decompressing, and I'm pulling those hips into the socket. Whew, getting tired. High elevation here in Denver. So then the stretching portion, driving in at the knee. And I want to make a whole video about this, is keeping your eyes one way, but turning your head, because that can really attack those torsional forces. There's a lot you can do with these hip hinging positions. Different stretches. Driving the hip back again. And then just reversing it, letting the knee go forward. But let me show you my favorite one. And one thing to prepare you for life is, even as you're moving from position to position, treat it like an exercise. Keep your spine strong. Go down. Try not to bend. Add a little leg extension. So this one I call the Thoracic Unwind. So I'm setting those hips, locking them so I'm not swaying in the back. I'm creating some nice curve there in my low back. I'm opening up, then really pressing at the top, really trying to open up everything. Most of us, we just kind of hang out here, do reps. If you fight for that last little bit, that's really where you're doing a lot of work. You can do the same thing with the eyes. Keep it one way. Turn the head. That really throws off your balance. And then switch it up to the other side. You can really feel that in the hip and the shoulder at the same time. That's why I like it. You can do it on both sides. We really need to combine the movements so we're hitting the shoulder and the hip at the same time. Another good one I like. Last one. Tightening, lengthening, pushing the hips in. The wider stance helps that. Going down. Keeping that spine as straight as you can. So the hips are already locked. So now you just raise those arms. And you can do this in more of a flat foot squat if you want. The spine does round a little bit, as you can see here. But this is a great position either way, because you're forcing the spine to lengthen at the top. I can really feel it in my left shoulder over my right. And there you go. That's going to untwist and ultimately strengthen the spine at the same time, combining both elements.